Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are excited to present our collaborative translation and literary analysis of selected excerpts from Nilnama Hikayat Satu, written by Malaysian author Ilal Ashraf. This project was designed to strengthen collaborative learning, peer learning, and cooperative learning. Throughout the process, we rotate roles such as primary translator, translation reviewer, and editor, and also literary analyst, allowing each of us to experience the different challenges and responsibilities involved in translating culturally rich narrative.
To start, we spend some time understanding the story context, tone, culture, background. Nirnama Hikayat combines classical hikayat elements like traditional rulers and moral lessons with modern action sequences. Knowing the blend helps us decide how formal or intense or engaged translation should sound.
Okay, exactly, Arjun. Without this cultural understanding, original translation would risk losing the story's power and nuance, especially here and conflict. It also helps us to identify the symbolism and literary devices present, which are key for accurate translation.
And from my perspective, discussing the tone and imagery early on was crucial. For instance, we need to ensure that the suspense, tension, and dramatic action in the story felt just as gripping in English as in Malay. Some words or expressions in Malay don't have direct equivalents, so we had to carefully choose words that preserve both meaning and emotion.
I agree. Another point we discussed as a team was narrative flow. Since the story moves quickly from intense action to dialogue and character observation, we have to make sure the English translation flows naturally, so readers wouldn't feel lost or disconnected from the story.
Yes, all these discussions guided our translation strategies. We debated when to translate literally and when to adapt creatively, especially for culturally embedded concepts or classical expressions. For example, the portrayal of Bagak Dojana and Sang Kancil require careful attention to the tone, so that English version still convey authority, fear, and also the suspense.
And we also organize ourselves to work efficiently, and each member initially translated the assigned sections individually. And then during the peer review sessions, we shared feedbacks, refined the vocabulary, and ensured the consistent tone, register, and narrative cohesion across all excerpts.
And the literary analysis was collaborative too. We discussed themes, characterization, conflict, symbolism, and cultural meaning, considering how our translation choices will affect interpretation and the reader's experience.
Exactly. Working together allowed us to balance accuracy, readability, and cultural appropriateness. It also helped us ensure that the story's dramatic tension and traditional storytelling style were preserved in English.
Finally, the process helped us reflect on the challenges of translating culturally rich material. It wasn't just about converting words, it was also about capturing tone, imagery, and narrative voice while still making the story engaging and coherent in English.
Alright, so in this presentation, we will first introduce ourselves and then the story and author, and then show the selected excerpts with our English translations. After that, we will explain our translation strategies, discuss the three device and tips. I'm sorry, and share reflection on how our choice shape interpretation and international connections. Right. So hello again. My name is Faris, and in this project, I took the role of moderator, primary translator, and translation reviewer. As the moderator, I coordinate our group discussion to ensure that everyone could contribute equally and that our flow was smooth. My responsibilities include assigning sections of the story for translation and reviewing the translation to make sure they were consistent in tone, register, and style. I also focus on translating action-heavy and intense scenes like the confrontation between Bagak Durjana's warriors of henchmen with Sang and Chill. My main goal is to maintain suspense, drama, and flow of the original Malay text while making it readable and engaging in English. In addition, I guided the team in aligning our translation strategies, discussing word choice, and ensuring that cultural nuance were accurately conveyed.
Hi everyone, I'm Sayang. My role focuses on translating specific excerpts and analyzing the literary style of the story. I concentrated on passages that involve dialogue and descriptive imagery, paying attention to how the tone, mood, and the characterization were expressed in the original text. During our discussions, I gave input on word choices and phrasing to make sure the translation felt natural in English while retaining the intensity and drama of the story. For example, when translating Bhagat Durjana's authority and the villager's fear, I had to decide between a literal translation and a version that conveyed the same emotional impact for English readers. I also provided feedback on the translations of other members, ensuring that the story's tension and literary style remain intact.
Hello, my name is Swana. So I acted primarily as a translation reviewer and literary analyst. My main responsibility was to review the translation done by the team and suggest improvements in clarity, narrative flow, and style, ensuring that the English translation reflected the original's rich literary quantities. So I focused particularly on literary elements such as symbolism, imagery, and characterization. For instance, in the scene where the scarred traveler confronts the warriors, I analyzed how the author used descriptive language to build suspense and convey power dynamics. This helped guide our translation so that the intensity and drama were preserved in English. My role also included helping the team maintain consistency in tone across the various excerpts.
And hi everyone, I'm Azrul, and my contributions mainly focus on translation, peer review, and narrative coherence. And I work on ensuring that the translated text flowed naturally and that the sequence of events and action scenes was easy for readers to follow. And I also reviewed the work of others, giving suggestions for improved sentence structure, dialogue pacing, and stylistic clarity. For example, in action sequence where multiple characters act simultaneously, I suggested ways to make the English translation dynamic, but not confusing, preserving the original excitement while keeping the narrative smooth.
Okay, thank you, Alvaro. Hello, my name is Zahid. Our main responsibility was literary analysis and contextual research. I explored the cultural, social, and historical context of Nirmaya Kayat 1 and examined how Ila Ashraf blended classical Kayat storytelling with modern action. This research guided our translation choices, especially when dealing with culturally embedded references, traditional authority figures, and moral undertones. I also analyzed the themes, symbols, and narrative techniques of the story, which helped the team ensure that the English translation retained the original meaning, tone, and literary impact. By combining research with practical translation work, I supported the team in creating a translation that was both faithful and accessible to English readers. With that, let's begin with a brief introduction of Bilal Ashraf and the background of Nirmalai Kayatwan. Okay. Bilal Ashraf is a Malaysian author celebrated for blending classical Malay storytelling tradition with modern narrative techniques. In Nirmalai Kayat, We can clearly see the influence of particle hikayat elements, such as the depiction of powerful rulers, mysterious warriors, and villagers who must navigate fear and authority. At the same time, Ashraf incorporates modern action sequences and dynamic pacing, making the story feel immediate and engaging to contemporary readers. By understanding this fusion, we were able to make informed decisions about how formal or intense our English translation should sound, particularly in moments involving confrontation or suspense.
Yes, and this traditional influence is especially evident in how authority and hierarchy are portrayed. Take Bhagat Durjana, for instance. He doesn't need long explanations of his power. His presence alone, combined with the fear he inspires in villages and his warriors, conveys dominance. The narrative relies heavily on showing rather than telling, which is a hallmark of classical Malay storytelling. In translation, we had to retain that immediate sense of authority without ever over-explaining. If we had softened the language in English, Bhagat Durjana's intimidation factor would have been weakened, which would have affected the tension of the entire scene.
Exactly, and it's not just authority. The story also balances intense action with descriptive observation. For example, when the villagers gather or when the scar traveler calmly face the warriors, the text combines physical action with psychological tension. In translation, we focus on keeping that dynamic pacing so that readers in English could feel both the urgency of the chase and the subtle psychological drama. We also had to be mindful of the cultural nuance. Certain Malay expressions and classical reference don't have direct English equivalent, so we had to adapt creatively while preserving the storyline's flavor. For instance, terms that hint at social hierarchy or moral obligation were carefully chosen to reflect both respect for tradition and readability in English.
And from my perspective, the blend of classical and modern elements directly influence our choices for tone and word selection. The story is suspenseful and action-packed, but it is also deeply rooted in Malay values, such as loyalty, courage, and respect for authority. In scenes like the confrontation with Bhagat Durjana's warriors, we had to ensure the English translation retained both the tension and the cultural context, so that the emotional impact and character dynamics were not lost.
And I'd like to add that the setting and imagery also reflect this fusion. From the bustling village market to the warung where villagers observe events unfold, the story paints a vivid picture of daily life and the social order. In translation, we had to balance descriptive clarity with narrative flow, making sure that the English reader could picture the scene without slowing down the story's momentum. The traditional elements like respect for authority and the archetype of a clever, elusive hero had to remain authentic while the action sequence needed to feel immediate and gripping.
Exactly. So understanding both the author's style and the story's cultural backdrop was essential. It informed every decision we made, from vocab to tone to sentence structure and metaphor. This way, our translation preserves the intensity, drama, and cultural resonance of Nimaya Hikayat 1 while making it accessible to English readers.
So in Yunama Hikayat 1, the excerpt opens with a very aggressive and commanding line from Bhagat Dujana, Di manakah budak itu? So we decided to translate it directly as, where is that boy? We chose not to soften or embellish the sentence because the impact of the lines come from the speaker's authority, not from the words themselves.
Yes, we actually debated whether to add a little extra emphasis, like where is that boy hiding, or where is that boy now? But we felt that adding extra words would dilute the threatening tone. In the original Malay, the abruptness and simplicity convey immediate anger. The villagers are startled simply because someone powerful is demanding an answer, not because of the phrasing itself.
Exactly. The strength of the line comes from context. So, Bagak Dujana is known to instill fear. A longer or more embellished sentence in English might make it sound casual or conversational, which is the opposite of what the Malay version achieves. The English "Where is that boy?" maintains brevity, directness, and menace, which aligns with the story's tone.
Okay, following that, the next sentence uses strong visual imagery. Quote, bagai halilintar, suara itu menggegarkan perkampungan Medini. Toei translated halilintar as thunderbolt to preserve both the sudden impact and their powerful imagery. The voice is also compared to a natural phenomenon, which is fast, loud, and impossible to ignore.
Yes, the choice of Thunderbolt instead of just thunder is deliberate. Thunder alone might convey sound, but lacks the sudden, piercing aggression implied in Halilintar. Thunderbolt gives a sense of force and directness, which works well in English while keeping the dramatic, almost mythic quality of the original Malay.
Also, this metaphor is important for setting the scene. The villagers' reaction is tied directly to the imagery. They are frozen, shocked, and momentarily paralyzed. In translation, we made sure to preserve that immediate, almost cinematic impact. We translated the next sentence as the villagers who had been absorbed in their own affairs in the heart of the settlement were jolted into shock at the sight of a group of heavily armed men. It keeps the villagers surprised and highlights the sudden appearance of danger.
And we also had discussions about how to handle the phrase menggegarkan perkampungan Medini. Literally, it means shook the village, but we chose jolted into shock at the sight of a group of heavily armed men to show both the psychological and the physical impact. In Malay, the shaking is metaphorical as much as it is literal. In English, we wanted readers to feel the tension through both imagery and action.
Right, and notice how the description of the armed men adds another layer of intimidation. Orang ramai diarahkan dengan urusan masing-masing, terperanjat besar melihat kehadiran sekumpulan lelaki dan tak bersenjata. Didahului seorang lelaki bertubuh besar lagi sasa. We translated it as the villagers were jolted into shock at the sight of a group of heavily armed men led by a large, powerfully built figure. This preserves the visual hierarchy and immediate tension. The leader stands out, and the rest are equally intimidating, which is crucial for the story's opening.
Yes, we also pay close attention to word choice for physical descriptions. For example, Tubuh Sasa becomes powerfully built rather than just big or muscular because we wanted to capture strength already and menace simultaneously. The English phrasing conveys both size and impact danger without sounding exaggerated.
Another
Another
point
point
is the
is the
weapon
weapon
description.
descriptions.
Tangan kanan
Tangan kanan
merupakan
memegang
senjata
senjata
bayatan
belati
besar
besar
lagi
lagi
berduri,
berduri,
dihadapkan di
dihadapkan
atas,
di atas,
tirai pada
tirai
bahu.
pada bahu.
He
He
translated it
translated
as,
this as,
in his
in
right
his
hand,
right hand,
he held a
he held a
massive
massive
white
white
club,
club,
resting it
resting it
casually
casually
against the
against
armor
the
on
armor
his
on his
shoulder.
shoulder.
We
We
debated whether
debated
to
whether to
say
say
resting it on
resting
his
it on his
shoulder
shoulder
or
or
leaning
leaning
against him,
against him.
but pressing
But
it
pressing it
casually against
casually
the
against
armor
the armor
is a
is a
non-strong
non-strong
but
but
terrifying
terrifying
confidence,
confidence,
showing that
showing that
this
this
project
part
is capable
the
in its
ball is
own.
Exactly, and in this scene, action, description, and characterization works together. The villagers shock the leader's imposing figure, the weapon, and all of these elements build tension. We wanted the English translation to preserve that interplay so the reader feels the same fear and anticipation as in the Malay original.
Finally, we also made sure that the narrative flow worked. The original Malay uses long descriptive sentences, but in English, we sometimes split them into shorter sentences to maintain the rhythm and readability throughout, while keeping the tension high. This ensures the reader can picture the scene clearly without getting lost in the long pauses.
And during our peer review sessions, one of our main focuses was the tone consistency. Since each of us translated different sections of the excerpt, there was a risk that the English version would feel disjoint or uneven. And we wanted to make sure that despite multiple contributors, the text reads as though it was written by a single narrator. This is especially important in action-heavy sequences where tone drives tension and readers' perception of authority.
Yes, exactly. A good example of this is the command line, "Cari budak itu sampai ketemu." This could have been translated literally as "search for the boy until you find him," but we felt that in English, a more urgent, authoritative phrasing would better convey Bhagat Rujana's dominance and the intensity of the moment.
Yeah, so that's why we choose to translate it as two short sentence. Find that boy, do not stop until you do. This division gives the command more impact. The first sentence immediately establishes the target, while the second adds a relentless urgency, showing that failure is not an option. It also mirrors the abrupt, forceful style often found in military or authoritative speech in English.
Splitting the sentence also helps control the pacing. The original Malay uses a single sentence, but in English, keeping it together could make it feel longer and reduce the immediacy of the thread by breaking it into two. Readers feel a sense of quick, successive commands which heightens tension.
During review, we also compared our translations of descriptive passages, especially those detailing the villagers' reactions. For example, orang ramai yang ralik dengan urusan masing-masing terperanjat besar melihat kehadiran sekumpulan lelaki lengkap bersenjata. We initially had slightly different versions. Some of us emphasized shock, others focused on confusion or fear. Through discussion, we agreed on the villagers, who had been absorbed in their own affairs in the heart of the settlement, were jolted into shock at the sight of a group of heavily armed men. This keeps the focus on both the suddenness of the event and the psychological impact, which is crucial for maintaining the story's tension.
Okay, so another part we reviewed closely was the character description. For example, the leader's physical presence and his weapon had to read consistently throughout the text. We debated phrases like powerfully built versus muscular or massive for the weapon. Final choice, a massive spiked club, resting it casually against the armor on his shoulder, balances clarity, menace, and flow.
Yes, and during editing, we also focus on sentence rhythm. In Malay, long sentences are common, especially in classical storytelling. While in English, we often broke them into shorter sentences or added subtle connectors to preserve tension and also their clarity without losing the descriptive detail.
And we also standardized terms used for authority and violence. For instance, we consistently use warriors for hulu balang and threat or intimidation for phrases describing fear. And this ensures the text feel coherent, especially when multiple translators are involved.
Exactly. Small differences in word choice can drastically affect reader perception of power. For example, choosing command versus order or shock versus terrified can make a character appear more or less imposing. Peer review allowed us to debate these nuances and select the words that best conveyed Bhagat Rujana's authority in English.
Finally, we also reviewed cultural expressions. Some Malay phrases like terkulat-kulat, which means frozen in shock don't have direct equivalents. We discuss whether to translate literally or adapt. In the end, we often choose adaptations that capture emotion and visual imagery, like stood frozen and bewildered, which preserves both the fear and the visual aspect.
Okay. The villagers' dialogue throughout the excerpt reflects a strong communal mindset, which is a central aspect of Malay culture. In many traditional cultures, including Kayat, the actions of one individual often impact the entire community. This is particularly evident when Sang Kancil mischief brought the attention of Agak Sujana warriors, putting the villagers at risk.
Exactly. Take for instance the line "Perkampungan kita pula menjadi mangsa." We translated this as "and now our village will suffer." Might seem simple, but it carries layer of meaning. The villagers are not just worried about themselves individually, but they are also conscious of the collective well-being. This highlights a cultural value where communal safety and harmony are highly prioritized.
Yes, and during translation, we carefully chose neutral but meaningful phrasing. We avoided overly dramatic words like doom or destruction because the fear in the text is pragmatic rather than theoretical. It's fear that arises from understanding authority and risk, which aligns with Malay storytelling traditions, showing respect for hierarchy and awareness of consequences.
And another thing we noticed was how the villagers' speech patterns reinforce their social positions. For example, they often speak in short, concise statements. We maintain that in English to show their simplicity, honesty, and agency while keeping the narrative spacing intact.
Yes, and even their reactions are culturally informed. In Malay societies, there is often a balance between respect for authority and collective caution. The villagers do not immediately confront Bagat to Janda's warriors. They worry, they defend quietly, and they act to protect the group. Translating this requires subtle choice to preserve the calm pragmatism amid fear.
Exactly, that's why we chose "and now our village will suffer" instead of something like "we're doomed." The latter will exaggerate panic and distort the cultural tone. The original Malay conveys concern and tension, but within a rational, measured response.
I also want to add that the villagers' dialogue shows interpersonal communication. They consult each other and discuss the situation. For example, apalah onar sekacil kali ini? Tentunya melampau kalau si Bagak sendiri turun kemari. We translated it as, what trouble has Sang Kancil caused this time? It must be serious if Bagak himself has come down here. Notice how the English preserves the questioning tone and shared concern. It reflects the community dialogue, showing that decision making and reactions are collective rather than individualistic.
And another subtle aspect is how fear is internalized rather than loudly expressed. Even when the villagers are aware of imminent danger, they did not shout or panic. In translation, we maintain this restrained tone, which makes the threat feel more realistic and culturally coherent.
Yes, and this approach also reinforces the authority of Bhagat Njana. By translating the village's fear in a composed manner, it emphasizes the power imbalance. The leader is intimidating without us needing to exaggerate his action. And the calm fear makes him seem even more commanding.
Ultimately, by focusing on communal response and subtle expressions of fear, we preserve the cultural context of Malay villages, where respect, awareness, and collective responsibility are paramount. It shows how translation is not just about words, but also about capturing social values and cultural norms.
Okay, so one of the most interesting characters in this excerpt is the scarred traveler. From the moment he is introduced, he stands out because he remains completely calm and composed, even as Bhagat Rajana's warriors created chaos around him. This calmness immediately sets him apart from the villagers and highlights his unusual presence in the story.
Exactly. In the original Malay text, his composure is emphasized repeatedly, so we preserve it in English with phrases like remain relaxed, sipping his drink from a bamboo container, and his gaze stayed fixed, utterly indifferent to the confrontation. These translations help the reader feel his unshakable confidence, which contrasts sharply with the fear and panic of everyone else.
Yes, and the contrast is essential for building tension in the narrative. The traveler doesn't immediately act or resist, which delays the resolution and makes eventual intervention more dramatic. Readers experience a heightened sense of suspense because they are waiting for him to respond, while everyone else reacts instinctively to danger.
Hmm. Symbolically, they represent control, internalized power, in contrast to Bhagat Dujana, who relies on loud external dominance. Bhagat's authority is shown through his booming voice and the panic inside, while the traveler's authority is quiet but absolute. His calm demeanor alone unnerves the warriors.
Also, the scarred traveler's physical descriptions adds to this contrast. The long, prominent scar is highlighted in both Malay and English. A long, prominent scar stretched from beneath his right jaw to just below his eye. This scar signals experience and danger without needing explanation. The calm posture plus the visible, the visible scar tells readers do not underestimate him.
That's true. We also discussed the phrasing around his gaze. The text says he tidak memerhatikan pertembungan. He doesn't even look at the confrontation. We translated it as utterly indifferent to the confrontation unfolding just beside him. This shows not just calmness, but control over the situation, reinforcing that his presence alone enough is to intimidate.
The action scene in this excerpt was particularly challenging because it moves very quickly and the intensity is conveyed in just a few lines in Malay. For example, bunyi meja kayu kerkecai seribu menggegar suasana. We translated it as the sound of splintery wood exploded through the air. This wasn't a literal translation, but we choose descriptive expansion to capture the explosive impact in English. The original phrase emphasizes the chaos and immediacy, and we wanted English readers to feel the same sudden shock.
Yes, and the choice of words like exploded and splintering conveys both sound and visual destructions, which is essential in action writing. And in Malay, the impact is compact, but English requires a bit more elaboration to preserve the sensation of violence and movement.
From the translation perspective, this scene also required balancing clarity and intensity. We wanted readers to understand the action without over-explaining while keeping the dramatic shock intact. It's a fine line. Too much detail and slows the scene. Too little reduces impact.
In analyzing excerpts, we identified three main themes: abuse of power, fear, and silent resistance. Bhagat Dujana represents the unchecked authority that instills fear in the villagers. The text repeatedly shows people stop their daily activities, panicking and fleeing, all classic signs of oppressive power.
Yes, and from a literary perspective, the author uses imagery and contrast to highlight these themes. For instance, the village's chaotic reaction contrasts sharply with the traveler's calm composure, creating a sense of tension and suspense. We made sure to preserve this contrast in English by choosing descriptive phrases that convey both fear and calmness.
And we also notice symbolism throughout the text. Bhagat Dujana isn't just a villain. He symbolized tyranny and authoritarian control. Because every action he takes, from shouting commands to sending warriors, reflects how power can dominate and terrorize ordinary people. On the other hand, the traveler symbolizes restraint, control, and moral authority. Even though he is capable of violence, he remains composed and calculated. Our translation choices, such as remain relaxed, sipping his drink, emphasize that symbolic calmness.
Exactly. When a device is contrast in action and transition, the warriors react immediately and violently, while the traveler's intervention is precise, almost effortless. This shows not only physical superiority, but also mental and moral strength. By structuring sentences set with short, sharp pauses in English, we ensure that readers feel the tension and understand the traveler's dominance without needing explicit explanation.
Also, I would like to add that cultural values are embedded in these devices. Fear of authority, communal responsibility, and respect for skillful power are present in Malay storytelling traditions. We had to translate these ideas subtly. For example, villagers saying, "And now our village will suffer," shows collective fear and responsibility rather than simply individual panic.
So, in conclusion, this presentation demonstrates that collaborative translation deepens understanding of literature. It's about more than language. It's about preserving emotion, cultural nuance, and narrative impact. So I think that's all for our discussion. Thank you everyone for your insight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.